So what exactly is a lethal gene? As a name itself indicates, it could prove to be lethal or fatal to the organism that possesses it. So it is a gene that is capable of killing its possessor. If an organism has a gene which is considered to be a lethal gene, that it could take the life of the organism. That's why you can say, you can call these genes, these detrimental genes, as lethal genes. The best example for lethal genes has been reported by Leucine Queno in the yellow lethal of mice, which is actually a gene which controls the coat color, the color of the fur on the body of the mice. So let us see the gene in the next slide. You can all understand that from this chart you can all see that there are two versions of the gene. Let me consider this as the gene Y. Okay, there happens to be a dominant Y and a recessive Y. Now this recessive Y, as it is mentioned in the chart, it is responsible for white coat of the body, and the dominant Y is responsible for the yellow coat of the body. And actually the normal gene was the small y, which is considered to be the wild type, means it was already existing in the population, so wild type of the gene. And scientists are of the opinion that this small y allele became a capital Y allele by a possible mutation. So we can consider the capital Y allele to be a mutant form. So both these genes control the coat color. And please remember, the recessive allele happens to be the normal allele existing in the population. It is called the wild type allele. And the dominant allele arose. How did it arise? It arose from a mutation. Okay, now when does it act as a dominant allele? Now notice here in these two genotypes, please notice all of you, capital Y is with small y, and capital Y, which is responsible for the expression of yellow coat. In this case the mouse has yellow coat, in this case also the mouse has yellow coat. That means when capital Y occurs with small y, capital Y will mask the expression of small y, and therefore the coat color becomes yellow in a heterozygous condition. Now let us take a homozygous small y condition. If a mouse has two copies of small y, then the color of the coat will be white. Okay, and I told you that small y is not only recessive, but it is wild type that is already existing in the population. But there is something peculiar about this case where the capital Y occurs in homozygous condition. And when capital Y occurs in homozygous condition, it functions as a lethal gene, and the mouse which possesses this kind of a genotype dies out. See, the mouse is dead in this case because it has two copies of capital Y. So normally the capital Y, which is responsible for yellow coat, sometimes this capital Y may also function as a lethal gene. When does it function as a lethal gene? In homozygous condition. When is it responsible for yellow coat? In heterozygous condition. Then what is the genotype for white coat? Homozygous recessive wild type. Did you understand? So the lethal gene here is the dominant allele capital Y, which came into existence from the mutation of the already existing recessive allele, that is the wild allele. Why am I calling it dominant? Because when it is in heterozygous condition, it is the capital Y that gets expressed, not the small y. Therefore, I am calling it as a dominant allele. And when is it proving to be lethal? When it is in homozygous condition. When it is in homozygous dominant condition, it kills the mouse. When it is in heterozygous condition, it is responsible for the yellow coat. However, like we already saw, when it is homozygous recessive or wild type allele, the coat color will be white itself. So this is how a lethal gene, its effect is varying. When it's heterozygous, it doesn't express its lethality. When it is homozygous, it expresses its lethality, and the mouse which possesses this will die. So like I said, normally the dominant Y is responsible for yellow coat, the recessive Y is responsible for white coat. This dominant Y, which is responsible for yellow coat, when it occurs in homozygous condition, it is considered to be a lethal gene. So this was the example in the case of mouse. There is another example where the plant, which is the corn, becomes entirely pale and white and without any chlorophyll in it. It is called albinism in corn. And can you imagine what will happen? You can see some plants here in the tray which have become completely white in appearance. Do you think such plants will survive? They cannot survive because they have absolutely no chloroplast in them, isn't it? Now there is a gene that controls this character, which is a lethal gene. So here it is mentioned wrong. It should be a recessive lethal gene, small g, which completely dominates. I think the dominant gene is capital G. See here, if a plant has capital G, it will produce normal chlorophyll. If a plant has 2 copies of small g, I told you the lethal gene is small g. And if a plant has 2 copies of small g, there will be no chlorophyll produced in this plant. And you can imagine a plant cannot survive without chlorophyll. So this is the lethal condition here, small g, small g. However, when there is capital G, small g, you all know that capital G is dominant over small g. It will not allow the expression of small g. So we know that capital G is responsible for chlorophyll synthesis. So anyway, the plants will not be affected in heterozygous condition. So which is the lethal condition? Small g is the lethal condition, because when 2 copies of small g occur together, there is no chlorophyll production. The plant becomes pale and yellowish and white, and it will ultimately die. So just to summarize, there are 2 genes here. One is responsible for normal chlorophyll production. One is responsible for not producing chlorophyll at all. Now this is considered to be the lethal gene because it is not producing. And this lethal gene, in what condition? In homozygous recessive condition, it is considered to be lethal. And this gene, when does it produce chlorophyll? Not only in homozygous condition but also in heterozygous condition, because capital G is dominant over small g. It will mask the expression of small g. So when it is both homozygous dominant and heterozygous dominant, we get chlorophyll, and therefore the plant is normal. So in this case, the lethality is again because of homozygous recessive condition. In the previous example I told you it was homozygous dominant that caused lethality. Here it is homozygous recessive that causes lethality, because when there are 2 copies of small g, there is no production of chlorophyll at all. Okay.